Make some noise! It's Making Monsters with Taylor Dahl. It's like beer and brats, a perfect combination.
You know the deal.
All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of Making Monsters. I'm Taylor Dahl, and if you have watched any Making Monsters, you know the gist of these are we like to highlight players from the previous game who had been playing well or who has been performing well in general in recent. And it's been a little bit of a struggle because this last start, I guess 3 weeks, the start of the season has not been good. 0-3 now. Luckily, I guess along with the Vikings, if we can look at any positive out of this, it's that they're not the only one that's starting the season off struggling. But it's just not been great, and they got absolutely manhandled by the Kansas City Chiefs. I'm not surprised whatsoever. The Kansas City Chiefs have Patrick Mahomes and a lot of talent all around there. Obviously, Travis Kelce, that was a whole storyline. I'm not even going to get into that. It's probably one of the most annoying things in the entire world to me. And then guys like Chris Jones on the other side of the ball. For some reason, the Bears let Pacheco just run all over them. Very frustrating. Actually, I know why. It's because our defensive line is almost non-existent outside of one guy named Andrew Billings, but who we did the episode on last week. So it was not fun. It was not a fun game to watch. There's a lot of issues on the Bears right now. I'm just hoping that maybe some of them start to get at least a little sorted out, because to me, I really do think that we have too much talent, and maybe it's not all in one group, but there's too much talent on this roster to look like the complete lost product that they look right now. It's just wild to me. But we're not here to talk about the bad stuff. We're here to talk about the good stuff, and that brings us to our monster of this week, Ja'Tyre Carter. Carter has been filling in for Nate Davis. Nate Davis obviously has not played the last two games due to personal reasons. With the Bucs, he didn't even travel because he had a death in the family, so he was dealing with that. This last week, he was at the game. By reports I read, he was at the game, and he was there to play in case of like an emergency backup situation. But due to those personal reasons, he was not starting. I'm assuming it's because of the death in the family. He wasn't practicing during the week. We'll see what comes out of this. But Carter had filled in for him for the Bucs and for Kansas City, and really has held his own, honestly. Versus the Bucs, he had 2 pressures and 0 sacks, no penalties. That was going against a guy like Vita Vea, who's an absolute beast. When you watch Vita Vea play football, he's a force. And some of a lot of people kind of think that the Tampa Bay defense is kind of like on the other end of things and on the way down, but they have a lot of talent over there and a lot of guys that know how to create pressure and a lot of guys that know how to get to the quarterback and kind of just create some chaos on that defensive line. And then, again, Kansas City's defense, you have guys like Chris Jones on that line, who is one of the best at what he does, and that's why everybody was shouting for him, trying to get them to their team this offseason when he was holding out. But unfortunately, he came back to Kansas City just in time to go out there and beat the Jags and then beat the Bears. So that was fun for me. But Ja'Tyre Carter only allowed 1 pressure versus Kansas City. Again, no sacks, no penalties. There was a moment during the Kansas City game that I thought was really fun, because I've talked about this a lot, of the offensive linemen and protecting your quarterback and seeing kind of that like feistiness in these guys, because that's their job. Their job is to be those protectors. And there was a moment where Whitehair kind of got into it with the Kansas City D-line. And as soon as Ja'Tyre Carter looks over and sees this happening, he bolts over there, kind of starts shoving people out of the way and helping him out. And I love that little moment, because to me it shows it wasn't towards Justin, this was towards Cody, but this is his guy, and he's going to protect his guy. So I love seeing that. Little things like that I love to see. So Carter, we drafted in round 7 of the 2022 draft with the 227th pick. He is out of Southern. It's an HBCU school. And he has a really interesting story, actually, because he's from a town called White Castle, Louisiana, which is about 40 minutes from Baton Rouge. It has 1,700 people in this town. It's just wild to me, because I live in Jacksonville, Florida, that has almost 2 million people, or like 1.5 million people. And my high school class alone had 500 people. So when I see towns like this, it's always so interesting to me to really get to know some of these guys and the type of people they are, and how that town groomed them into being who they are. So Today, I was working on a couple interviews. Like I said, he went to Southern. So his coach Barry, who was his offensive line coach at Southern, was the one who really recruited him and one of the ones that really wanted to push that offensive line position, because in high school he did play tight end, he played some defense, and I didn't think that he played offensive line from what I read, but I did talk to his high school coach and it seemed like he did play offensive line, but we'll get into that story a little bit later of how he ended up having to when he was playing tight end. But anyway, so Coach Barry kind of saw him and really wanted to recruit him and liked a couple things about him when it came to what he saw just athleticism-wise and how he thought that was going to transfer to the offensive line. Unfortunately, Coach Barry is coaching at a different school. He's a head coach at another school now, so he could not join me. Maybe later in the season we'll find some time to be able to chat with him and just get that next level. But I did end up finding it was a defensive coordinator, actually, for White Castle High School, which is where Jatari Carter went. And Quentin Payne, Coach Payne is his name, and he is going to join us to talk about Carter's time when he first transferred over to football, because his main sport was basketball. And that's not totally off that we see that. I actually had several stories last year where the athlete's main sport was basketball. But this story is really interesting because he was a diehard basketball guy, did not want to play football. And Coach Carter kind of convinced him to come that way. So we'll get into that interview. We'll go talk to Coach Carter. And then after that, we'll recap a little bit, talk about maybe what we need to do this weekend. And maybe I'll go over some of the things so you have a little bit of that insight of him from college. Since I wasn't able to get Coach Barry this time, at least we'll be able to get some of what led him to draft day and the Bears drafting him. All right, now we are joined by Coach Payne. He was the head coach for Jatari Carter, and if you have been tuning in to this podcast so far, you know why we are talking about Carter. Carter has filled in very, very well for a veteran guard that has been in the league for a while. The Bears picked up Nate Davis this last offseason, and Nate Davis has struggled. Well, he's had some personal issues. He had some injuries during camp, so Carter's been able to step in for him. And so far in 2 starts, honestly, Coach, I don't know how much you've watched recently of him, but he's been able to play really, really well and against some tough defensive lines in Tampa Bay and Kansas City. So that's why we're here to talk to you right now about Jatari Carter. Again, thanks for hopping on with me.
Oh, no problem.
So let's just jump into this, because if I read this correctly, you literally chased this man down the hallway to get him to come play football in high school. Tell us a little bit about that story. What'd you see in Carter at first on the basketball court that you thought would transfer over to the Gridiron?
Yeah, actually, I wasn't his head coach. I was his defensive coordinator. Okay. And man, I showed up there. Man, it must have been summer 2015 maybe. And I mean, all the kids were all working out. Man, they got a bunch of good-looking kids. But there's this behemoth of a kid in the gym. I mean, he's huge. He's athletic. He's so nifty. Got real soft hands. Really, really good, really quick feet. He run down the court. You don't hear his feet. He's very, very nimble, very light. And I said, man, that kid look like he's about 250, 260. So, man, he's not going to play basketball long. And they were like, oh, no, he's a basketball player. I said, that kid's a pro. I said, man, trust me. And at that size, because he was already always a tall kid, around 6'4", 6'5" at that time in 10th grade. So he was super tall, super athletic, but just like you said, making a monster of a human being, just a very, very large kid. So athletic, so nimble. And and he was always a humble kid, always loved to have fun, great kid to be around. I knew that not only, we could help him and make him a better football player, but I knew he would, his personality would be a general in the locker room and, kind of bring us together as a team as well.
Now, was the basketball coach stay away from my guy? Because from what I heard, too, he was a big part of that state championship team that they had there. And I think the MVP of that game, too. So they obviously probably wanted him to focus basketball.
Well, man, I got to give major props to his coach. Man, coach was always willing to do what was best for the kid. He was always into doing what's best for the kid. I mean, of course, coaches, how it is. Coaches worry about their guys and, I need him and this, that, and other. But Jatari was a different situation altogether. Like that kid, everybody was looking at him knew that, there's a possibility he could play college basketball because he was really, really good.
Yeah. What was
But his body, you knew he was going to make a difference on grass.
Well, definitely, and guys like you, coaches who are around these players a lot through high school, kind of they see that, they recognize the players that are kind of that next level type of player, and it seems like Carter was one of those guys for basketball and football in high school. What was his initial reaction when you were telling him to come play football? He at first wasn't about it.
No, he wasn't with it at all at first. He was like, man, this coach crazy, man. This guy is crazy. And he just won't leave me alone. He would say all the time, the kids would come to me, they were like, Coach, Jatari said you just won't leave him alone. I said, you tell him I'm not going to leave him alone. So, yeah, I would literally every day, man, I would go grab him. Come on, walk with me. We'll walk and we'll just talk, just me and him, about the future, about, what could be all the possibilities, man. And I'm glad he made me look like more of a prophet than this scenario.
Yeah, and I'm sure like that hesitation now he looks back and probably like even giggles about a little bit because he was saying no to something that now he's in the NFL. And like I said, starting on the Bears offensive line in the NFL.
Yes, absolutely. Funny story. I had to trick him to get him out there. So Jatari was initially, because he was an athlete, he did not want to play offensive line.
Yeah.
So I had to sell him on the fact that, look, we're going to play at tight end and some defensive line. So he was with that. He was excited. It's more of a spotlight thing. He's going to get the ball. He get to, you know what I'm saying? So he was with it. But after that year, I was like, you're going to have to move one down. Like you're going to be the guy. Like, so, yeah, that's kind of the scenario, man. But once he was out there, he was a natural.
Well, and obviously, when you're a tight end, you actually have statistics. As an offensive line, it's kind of hard to be like, hey, I had this and this and this number. And
correct.
I read an article actually when he was talking, and you're like, as an offensive lineman, the only time you really get talked about is if you allowed a bunch of pressures and sacks. And then quarterback, if the run game's fantastic or the quarterback throws multiple touchdowns, you're not getting talked about. You're just like, hey, that running back's really good. And that's why we are here on Making Monsters, honestly, and why I like to do this, because personally, I think the offensive line, and we've seen it in Chicago, when you don't have one, it's really, really hard for a quarterback.
Sure. Yeah.
And so to talk about that a little bit, you said once he was out there, he got in the hang of things and really started to like it. So obviously he agreed to come play football at some point, because he mentions that Kobe Bryant was kind of the guy that led him to his work ethic and loving basketball, which completely get it. Everybody loves the Mamba mentality. And I think that, when did you start seeing that transfer to the football field? Like, because how many years did he play football?
He played football for 3 seasons.
Okay.
Yeah. It was immediate though. Like once he was locked in, he was locked in. White Castle is a small community, very close knit. So it's not like he had to come and join a new group of kids. These were all his friends.
Yeah.
And the accountability piece was natural because he was a leader by nature. Like fun loving guy, but very serious, always dedicated, hard worker, loved to win. So him coming out there, it was an easy transition. And the blessing was that he was underneath some great leadership. The guys that were older than him were just excellent. I mean, those guys set a tone, set a standard. And, it was kind of like they built a place that for a guy who was already had the frame for it to build, to come in and just say, okay, this is how it's supposed to look.
Yeah. And that helps when you come into even back in high school, even all the way through high school, through college and the NFL, when you have a foundation around you, obviously that helps. The Bears are working on that. It's a little bit of a mess in Chicago right now.
Yeah.
That's for another time. When through those 3 years, Coach, you saw him, obviously, you said tight end originally. That's the way you kind of tricked him into getting to play football.
Yeah.
But eventually, did he start playing? Because I know he was recruited as an offensive lineman from college. When did he start O-line within those 3 years?
Oh man, actually, like the second or third game. I mean, it was easy. You watch him, he'll punish guys on the edge as a tight end. So we were like, look, we're going to a smaller set. you're better than the other guys. You just got to squeeze down a little bit and just play. It's still basically tight end, but we're just going to run the ball in scenarios and stuff like that. Just kind of eased it in on him.
Yeah, we're like, here that you're doing great at this, but we really need you right here.
Yeah,
Obviously that frame, and one of the things that I saw that the Southern head coach kind of looked at when he was recruiting him was thin ankles was his thing. And to me, at first, I was like, what does that even mean? But once you
yeah,
start thinking about what an offensive lineman has to do and how quick they have to get into their position and form, and then also how strong they have to be and being able to anchor, all of those things go into obviously playing offensive line. So what was that process like for him? Did he kind of he took to it pretty well? It was frustrating at times, or how did that go?
man, he took to it really well. But we had again, that older group of guys that year when he first came in. That was a tough. It was a really good ball club. We had a lot of good leadership. Those guys were great, and it was natural for him. Like, I promise, it was natural. He's so unselfish as a young man, as a human being, that when we needed him, and he was looking at some of his guys that were older than him, and he knows that, like, man, it's their senior year, they depended on me. Yeah, let's go. Yeah, I'll slide down. Like, so it was a natural thing. So yeah, he was. Shout out to the kid, the family, man. The whole community of White Castle. Those are a bunch of great, great folks. They put a lot of character into all of the children there, and I mean, they do an amazing job, man. The community as a whole, man, it's just an amazing place, and it helped mold a lot of young men from there. And Jatari was in a perfect situation to follow those guys who came before him, and just to take his gifts, because let's not get it twisted. He's just blessed. That's a gift from God. There's no other way to dress it up. And to have that work ethic from a family perspective, from a friendship perspective, from a community perspective, hard work was not. He wasn't going to miss it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a perfect storm.
The man's an athlete, and when you get guys like that, and usually they find their way. And this was for him, as I mentioned several times, basketball and football. He played both of them, and he was really good at both of them in high school. Basketball more of his life than football, but he kind of made an announcement, I think via social media, that he was going to go into college football and not basketball. Number one, how much did that shock some of you guys around? Number two, why do you think he really ultimately made that decision? It was just he felt his calling was football?
Well, I don't know. The truth is, I had left. I took another job. Funny story. I took another job as a DC at a high school about 15 miles north of there, to Coach Patrick Queen.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I took another gig, and I wasn't there when he left, but I got a call. And from the coach that recruited him, shout out to Coach Barry, head coach at Benedict College, was his offensive line coach at Southern. Gave me a call, man, and he was like, I think you guys are going to come. I was like, oh, I said, that's perfect, man. Coach Barry is a good friend of mine. He's a really good offensive line coach, really good ball coach, period. But he specializes in the offensive line. And I mean, it couldn't have been a better fit for Jatari, for a guy who needed a lot of structure, a lot of foundational work. That was a great place for him. I mean, it was a perfect fit. Like I said, just a perfect storm.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes things play out that way for people. I don't know a ton about that area and how high school football is there. I personally, obviously, I cover the Bears, but I live in Jacksonville, Florida. High school in Florida is intense. It's very competitive. There's a lot of guys obviously coming out of Florida and going into D1 schools and now in the NFL. But you guys were about 45 minutes from Baton Rouge, so there has to be a decent amount of competition there in high school football.
Oh, that there is a hotbed. I mean, very, very hotbed, man. You look at the success of schools like Southern, LSU, also the emergence of programs like Tulane being powerhouses now, and of course University of Louisiana Lafayette, all the things they've done over the past years, and also on the D1, FCS level. I'm sorry, Southeastern, McNeese. Go Pokes, Nichols, all of those guys, La Tech, a little bit further north. Those guys make their money recruiting that southeast and southwest Louisiana. So he was just in a great place, to for his tape to speak for itself, because he was playing against men, like, he was playing against a lot of great talent, a lot of D1 NFL talent. So he didn't miss a lot. So
Yeah.
when it was time for him to make that move, it was kind of familiar faces in the room, like, oh, I can get that guy.
Yeah.
I got that guy before. Even in the NFL, like, we talk a lot just about style,
Yeah.
mindset. And he's like, Coach, man, I remember this guy. I'm like, yeah, of course you do. You know what I'm saying? Those are the same guys. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, that was the culture from high school football in Louisiana to college to professional is a big, big impact for our area.
Yeah, and I mean, I just mentioned it. These first two starts that he's going against guys like Vita Vea and Tampa Bay, who's probably
Yeah.
like the fiercest men you can go against in the defensive line. And then a defensive line with Chris Jones. Chris Jones is knowingly talked about as one of the best players defensively in NFL, and he was able to handle himself against these two lines. He had one play against Kansas City. It was very early in the game that we were all like, "Oh, he got pancaked there a little bit." God turned it on. It was a whole nother level for the rest of the game. And it's so fun to watch that because he noticed right away, okay, I'm going to have to take this a little to the next level this game. And he did. And when you're protecting someone like Justin Fields, we know moves around a lot. You never really know where he is behind you, honestly. So you're kind of protecting a lot of area of the field. A couple more before I let you go, because you mentioned you talked to him still. What were his feelings? Because he got drafted. He went in the 7th round. There was a lot of chatter about him going into that draft. No one really quite knew where he would land, but the Bears got him in 7. And honestly, I'm very glad they did. What were his feelings towards that when he did get drafted and when it was to the Bears?
Of course, excitement, because, happy to get off the board, happy to be picked up. And still at the same time, though, like I said, Jatari is a really, really humble kid, really good kid. And sorry, young man. Sorry, you got to forgive me for that one, right? But yeah, so he's a very humble young man, and his mindset was more of a last man, Coach. What? I just want to make it.
Yeah.
I just don't. I want to make it, and that was his mindset the whole time. Like, just completely unselfish. Just wanting to be a part, wanting to make sure he can produce and be a really, really real help to the team. And I told him, I said, man, listen, you're gonna do it. Like, just give yourself time and just always remember why you're there. And that if you remember your why, you're gonna knock it out, because you just got to go out there, show them who you are, go hard, continue to be more explosive at the point of attack. Let people see you be the monster you are, right? Let people see that, show it all the time. When the lights are on, you have to be that.
Yep.
A lot of detail on film study. You aggravate your coaches.
Yep.
Stay in there. Make them stay late.
Yep.
Tell them you want to hang around. I want to know it all. I want to be a sponge. I want to get it. I want to know every single thing I can. Make yourself an asset. And it was kind of easy, like, just speaking with him, because, like I said, being a humble young man, I felt like he was still 15.
Yeah.
So it was a very easy conversation. Yeah, exactly. Even when we talk now, it's just, it's very, very short. He's busy. I'm busy.
Yeah.
We don't have super long conversations. Sometimes just a quick text, sometimes maybe a DM, maybe like, hey, Coach, you saw that today? Or, hey, man, I saw you looked amazing. Yeah, I got to work on this, just some short stuff, just to remind him that I love him, that we praying for him, that, he come from good stock, man. And, real good stock, so, got to give a lot of shout outs to the guys who are around him, his coaches, Coach Thomas, Coach Jackson.
Yep.
Funny story, all of his high school coaches, the 3 of us, majority, right? We're all frat brothers. We're all Omegas. Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated, right? And then Coach Barry, that recruited him, is Omega as well. So he was around a great, like similar like minds the whole time.
Yeah. So
now him being there, and he's still getting, he's still having conversation with these same type minds. It's putting him in a place where, man, we're so thankful to, man, that we can actually be able to, impact him in a positive way, to love up on him, and keep him focused, man. He's a great kid, great story. We love him.
Yeah, and honestly, I love him. I love watching these guys just kind of grow and progress. And we didn't see much of him last year, and so this offseason, I really was hoping we'd be able to see more of Carter. Do you ever mess with him a little bit and say, "You're welcome. You're welcome for this"?
Man, no. Maybe some of his friends might mess with him. I don't. No, man. Me and Jatari, we really have a great relationship. He might say thank you a little too much sometimes, just out of just love. Like I say, he. Everything I said is genuine. Like that's who he is. So he's gonna, he's a great guy. Nah, I never pick with him about that. I might pick with him just about, you know, don't finesse yourself, be a dog, get in the paint with it, you know what I'm saying? Stuff like that, basketball analogies. But nah, we really have a great relationship. I'll save the picking for later on. Once we man, praying to God that he continues to do well and he continues success, man. Who knows, maybe a gold jacket one day. You know what I'm saying? We praying for him, and I'll pick with him then.
There you go. Final one before I let you go, because I was talking about his feelings on like during the draft process and everything, but it had to be really cool for you because we just talked about you watch this kid grow and physically and mentally on the football field, off the football field, I'm sure in every way, because when you're meeting him, he's 14, 15 years old. And now here he is in his 20s playing on an NFL team. So what was that feeling like for you too, watching that on draft day and seeing his name selected?
Man, honestly, I was super ecstatic. He called me. He wanted me to come over, but I never like to be a burden. So I wanted the family to have their time. And I told him that I said, man, I love you, coach, love you, but we're going to talk. You know what I'm saying? It's a time for you and your family, man. You guys, your mom is your parents that's the ones, I was just blessed to be able to be in a good place with some other great individuals, some other good guys, like I say, Coach Jackson, I shared the DC spot with over there, and Coach Thomas was the head coach who brought me in over there at White Castle. To come into a situation with a community like that, man, with parents like that, a family like that had already poured into this young man so much, man, I was just blessed to be a part. So seeing it was a blessing. I was super ecstatic for him, and happy for the family. They deserve it. And it was a great moment. But I called, we talked continuously throughout the process. And but at the end of the day, I just wanted the family to enjoy it. But seeing it was amazing. It was amazing. The smiles on their faces, the joy. It just was a blessing.
And I know it gets a little nerve wracking, especially when you're wading through. It was the 7th round. So when you're wading through then, I'm sure nerves start coming and you start wondering, like, maybe it's not going to happen. And then it does. So it's an even more like, wow, this is actually happening type of moment. I really respect that you wanted him to do that with his family, because it is really important. And like you said, you got to make the mamas proud. And I'm sure she was probably bawling her eyes out, because I know I would. I would.
Yeah, no joke. Yes, indeed. Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you so much for hopping on with me. I really appreciate it, and I really look forward to keep watching Carter on the football field. He's such a fun, and like you said, just a good guy too. So it's been really fun to cheer for him as a Bear.
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely.
Thank you. Have a good one.
All right. Shout out to the Qs.
All right. Thanks to Coach Payne. That was great. So many moments in that I just loved. So many little things that really stood out to me. Number one, him talking about like the soft feet in the hallway. He could barely hear him coming down the hallway. And this is a big guy. And even in high school, and obviously he grew even more as he was in college, and we'll get to that in a second. But I love hearing this. Like, this guy was a full-on Mamba mentality, loved basketball, and just one person having a conversation and being like, hey, like, I see something in you. You could really be great at this. Changed his path, changed his whole trajectory of his life. And he kind of and then one of the articles I read, he kind of joked about, because one of the basketball schools that were recruiting him was St. Peter's, and in 2022 St. Peter's were the first 15 seed to reach the Elite Eight. And that was the school potentially he could have gone to. So I'm sure there's moments in his life where he's like, man, like, what if I chose basketball? Like, would I have gone to March Madness? Would I be in the NBA? Would I be starting in the NBA like I am the NFL right now? And yes, he's starting in the NFL because someone else has some personal issues, but that's definitely something the Bears are going to have to look at going forward. There's a lot of injuries on that line right now, so maybe they can slide him in some other places. But he's come in and he's played really well. And to be honest with you, Nate Davis, that first game did not look good at all to me against the Packers. He looked like he hadn't practiced all summer because he hadn't. And you know who has? You know who has been practicing with Justin Fields and practicing with those other offensive linemen, especially right now with these other backups? Tyree Carter. And I'm more confident in him right now than I am Nate Davis. And granted, we just lost Braxton. I haven't really looked into the Larry Borum film yet to see how he really handled himself last week, but that big task to be thrown at Larry Borum, him coming in for Braxton in week 3. But yeah, so as I was saying, White Castle, Louisiana, 1,700 people. Kobe Bryant, we mentioned, and that was his role model, and so that just kind of shows you a little glimpse of like the type of personality he is, and we've been able to see that in glimpses so far, even on the Bears, of him kind of like pushing through and what he's been able to do this last 2 weeks. So I mentioned Coach Barry. So some of the stuff I read about of Coach Barry, the first time he saw him actually was at a Friday Night Lights camp, and at this camp, that's when he started pursuing Carter. He started recruiting him during this process, and he said he immediately saw him and he liked him for his athleticism and thin ankles, is what he said. He goes on to talk about how the thin ankles helps with guys. It leads to guys having the great feet, fast feet, and being able to bend, and that's kind of what stuck out for him. So he really recruited him hard for this offensive line position. Once he got to Southern, which he chose to go, he made an announcement on social media that he was choosing football over basketball. I mentioned St. Peter's recruiting him for basketball, and after that he kind of said, hey, I think I'm going to go play football, and Southern was who he ended up choosing. He redshirted his freshman year because he needed to gain weight. So he didn't like the weight room, apparently. That wasn't his thing, which is fine. But so he ended up going real hard, working in the weight room, kind of found a love for the weight room too. And that in the article I was reading and kind of some of the stuff I've read about Carter, he was really like very against it for a while. And everyone kind of started saying, if you want to be successful at this, you're going to have to learn to love it almost. And so he did. And he went from 260 pounds to 311 pounds from his freshman year to his senior year at Southern. So obviously that's a lot of muscle gaining, a lot of strength they're gaining during that. And that's kind of what you were seeing of Carter now and what you were seeing in his senior year, which in his senior year, he didn't give up a single sack and only allowed 3 pressures in his entire senior year at Southern in his senior season. So that's just, you can see the progress of this kid who got thrown into a position, a sport/position he had never played his entire life, and the progress he had over his 3 years in high school to now the progress he had in his years in college, and then now we're seeing that pan out even in the NFL level. And I know last year, like, some people are probably going to watch this and be like, well, if he's good, then why isn't he the main starter? Like, why isn't this the situation? And maybe I don't know, maybe they like some of these other guys and certain things they can and can't do, or maybe they went and paid money for Nate Davis, and you want a veteran guy. This is another young guy on the line. You don't want too much youngness on there because you do need some sort of veteran leadership, and I think that's because when you look at Braxton's young, Tevin's supposed to be at left guard. He'll be coming back hopefully next week. By the way, he did tweet. I tweeted the picture of his little Dragon Ball Z hero, I don't know the names of all these people, coming back to life. And right before he beats the big villain in Dragon Ball Z, and his picture. So seems to me Tevin's about ready to come back. So freaking excited for that because I love Tevin Jenkins. I've said that on here a whole lot. I hope he can stay healthy for the rest of the season because he just makes the line so much different. And I really do think it will make a difference. But Braxton, young, Tevin, young, Cody, I guess you could say, is that veteran piece. Cody struggled with injuries too in the last couple years, so maybe that's kind of their hesitation. Okay, well, if we lose Cody, then what? But then Nate Davis is supposed to be that veteran piece, that kind of anchor of all of it, and it doesn't seem like it's been that. So the coaches really are going to have to make a choice of what to do moving forward, because Tyree Carter, through these 2 weeks against solid defensive lines, has been really able to hold his own. And when I say hold his own, like play really well for a year 2 guy. And I, along with a lot of other Bears fans, are just really frustrated at Nate Davis at this time. And I'm sorry, whatever, the personal issues he's going through. But man, like, all camp you didn't practice. You're sitting there standing on the sideline doing nothing. You didn't wear pads. You hardly played. And I don't think played at all during the preseason. And then in week 1, you got absolutely worked. And you want us to sit here and support you and hope that you can come back and jump on this line when somebody else, a young, feisty, fun, athletic kid, is coming in and playing really well. At this point, I'm rooting for Ja'Tyre Carter, and I do hope they keep him on the line somewhere. Like I said, maybe they'll shift him around. There were rumors last week that they would possibly move him to left tackle over Larry Borum. That's an interesting decision for me. Not totally sure how that would pan out, but it's something to look into. If Nate Davis does come back, maybe they slide him over there. I don't know. I just really do hope that we see a little bit more of Carter on the line and what he can do. So he was one of only 4 HBCU players to be drafted to the NFL Combine. This is just such a cool thing. Like, what an absolute moment for him to know that he's put in all of this hard work. And Coach Payne mentioned that a lot, of how hard of a worker he was and how much he just dedicated him to this sport at that time of, not playing the sport, not playing this position, and then all of a sudden just kind of like starting to fall in love with it, but also just putting all of himself into this, and I love that about him. So 1 of 4 to get invited to the Combine. And what I was reading about him, he had a lot of comments, Carter had a lot of comments about how he had to try a little harder. There's guys from LSU at the Combine. There's guys from Alabama at the Combine. And these guys are automatically getting recognized because they play for schools like this. So he said he had to work a little harder. He had to be a little more intense. He had to put a little bit more effort. And because of that, he was getting noticed. But he did have to try a little harder than maybe some of those guys coming from those other schools. And I love that about him because it also shows that he's willing to do that, and not every guy is. Most guys are like, hey, I'm talented, like they'll notice. He wanted to take that extra step of being like, no, I really want you guys to look at me. I'm talented. I can do this. I want to be this person in the NFL. So one of the things that I also read in the one-on-one battles, he faced Oklahoma's Perion Winfrey. And during this, that's when he captured the attention of Breck Ackley, who is one of the scouts for the Chicago Bears. That's when he first saw him. And oddly enough, Breck Ackley went to Southern. And so he had these he was familiar with the school and kind of a lot of the coaches and players and everything around. And he really put himself into watching Carter and understanding Carter and learning about Carter, and that's when the word to the Chicago Bears kind of started getting spread along, and it was at the Combine that this first started happening. So he talked about when he was going up against Winfrey, how he just didn't seem stressed at all. He didn't seem strained. And he said that a lot of guys, when going against talent from schools like the SEC or Big 10, Big 12, like some of the other schools, obviously this is a smaller HBCU school, so when you're going against some of these guys who are going against top tier talent every week, he said sometimes you just you see them get a little strained, a little stressed. And he said he did not see that from Carter whatsoever, and that's one of the first things that really caught his eye. So then a month later, a lot of schools, the LSU had their pro day. Southern, being very smart, had their pro day the same day or around the same time, so that when people were leaving LSU's pro day, they were all like, hey, we're hearing about this kid, Ja'Tyre Carter, down at Southern. Let's make this little trip over and go watch him. And that's when that happened. He ran a 5.02 40. He had a 34.5 vertical and a 9.3 broad jump at his pro day, and I guess really stood out. There was a lot of coaches there who I guess weren't even really surprised at what he was able to do. One of his coaches at Southern actually was like, I'm not surprised at all. Like, this is the guy he is. He's athletic, he's competitive, he's a hard worker, and so everything that you see in Ja'Tyre Carter, that's who he is. He wasn't putting on a show for pro day. He was being who he was and who he had been all through college and the time that he coached him. So that was just a really cool story to me, because it was just this progression of life that really, like I said, just changed his trajectory, and it looked like it's really worked out for the best. But we do have the coaches are going to have some decisions to make, but honestly at this point I don't even know if I trust what the coaches are doing, because the product they've been putting on the field has been just absolutely awful. This week we have the Broncos. The Broncos are going to be they just got beat 70-20 by the Miami Dolphins. So to think that they're not going to come in here with like a little bit of fire and not wanting to get embarrassed again, that's Russell Wilson is going to come up here. Let's ride. And Russell Wilson didn't play bad last week either. It wasn't him. The Denver defense is bad. The Denver defense, the run defense, very bad like us. So it's just going to be a lot of bad, I think, on the football field. So I think it's going to be up to the Bears to play football, go back to these basics and figure out, like, run the freaking ball. Like, I don't know why we aren't doing that at this moment. it's been known now for a season and 3 games that your run blocking is better than your pass protection. It's been known that Justin Fields, when using his legs, opens up so many other opportunities. I just don't understand why we're not taking advantage of those certain situations when you can. There was a lot of mistakes last week. I mentioned that earlier in the podcast, and you obviously hope that some of those are cleaned up. You hope that DJ catches that ball. You hope that Khalil Herbert doesn't fumble. Those little things lead to that start to spiral. But you also get to the situation where you're kind of like, okay, at one point, do we get any sort of pressure? At one point, can we touch the quarterback? Because last week we didn't do it one freaking time. We have 1 sack on the season, and that's absolutely unacceptable, especially, and I said this all offseason, that Yannick Ngakoue was not going to be the guy to all of a sudden change this defensive line. You got a guy who is literally the most one-dimensional defensive player you can get, and that's what you decide to do. That's for another time too. This Making Monsters isn't about being angry, but I'm just frustrated right now. But I don't think I'm off on the edge of a cliff like a lot of you guys are. I do have a little bit of hope of like, okay, things will start to click. This is a lot of newness that are all playing together. There's a lot of backups on the offensive line right now. There's a lot of backups in the secondary right now. We already knew the defensive line struggle, so that's putting a whole lot on the linebackers. TJ Edwards on the way to possibly breaking a Bears tackling record. That's something fun to watch throughout the season. A lot of people are talking about where's Tremaine Edmonds? Well, I'll tell you where our linebackers are absolutely everywhere, because our defensive line is doing nothing, so they're having to cover so much field and do jobs that technically they're not supposed to be the ones doing. So it would be nice if up front could help a little bit, not counting on it, but if we could create any sort of pressure whatsoever, that'd be absolutely wonderful. But in addition to that, I think, like I said, just go back to the basics of the offense. Do whatever you were doing last season when we went on that stretch of scoring a lot of points, because let Justin use his legs, run the ball, launch it down to DJ Moore. Because once people start getting scared that Justin is going to run and they put that spy on him, that's when guys come up, and that's when you'll find those receivers open deep in the field. But during Kansas City, there was nobody open. There was making no separation. Justin had nowhere to go with the ball, and it was just an absolute mess. So those things have to start changing, or this is going to be a very long season, and it's only 3 weeks in, and we're already having a very long season. So we will see. Anyways, that is my episode about Ja'Tyre Carter. He sounds like an absolutely amazing person, and when I posted that I was doing this episode, him and his agency both retweeted it, so it seems like they're also both excited right now to be able to be doing what they're doing with the Chicago Bears, and I just hope it continues. I really hope to I would love this line of draftees by the Chicago Bears and having Braxton and Tevin and Darnell Wright and Ja'Tyre Carter. Like, how fun would that be? Oh, and Cody Whitehair, like, all drafted by the Chicago Bears, all guys that, and then you having a good offensive line, and you put in actual stuff that has worked, and you've developed these guys into players that are protecting your quarterback, and now you can shift over and really start building this defense back up to what we hope it can be. That's just my little hope, because I think that would be really cool. We watched the Lions and Packers last night. Go Lions. Thank you for doing what the Chicago Bears can never do, and that's beating the Packers at Lambeau. Thank you, because there was moments last night where the refs were literally just handing over, like, the 2 back-to-back calls were so bad, and then they literally, the whole entire quarter ended, and they got to run a play. I was just so frustrated. That's what the Packers do. That's what the refs do to the Packers. But the Lions their line looks really, really good, and it looked like, for the most part, Jared Goff was super comfortable back there, and they spent 3 first-round picks on their offensive line. And so as much as people want to complain about taking Wright over Jalen Carter, but then in the same breath complain about why our offensive line sucks, stop complaining about it then. Like, everything's not going to be fixed at one time. It's going to take a while. Ryan Pace and Nagy left this team in a black hole that had to be pulled out and completely recalibrated, and now that's what they're trying to do. It's not going to happen right away, but if you want to protect your quarterback, you have to draft guys to protect your quarterback. That's the bottom line. It's just what it is. So, we got to stop complaining about that. We've got to stop tweeting every time Jalen Carter makes a play, because it's done. It's over. That is not what the highest priority in their heads were. They didn't want to miss out on a guy like Darnell Wright, who's been playing really, really, really well, actually, and I'm sure I'll have an episode coming up on him in not too long, just because that's what he's shown us so far. But anyways, hopefully we have a funner weekend a little bit better of a weekend this weekend. I'm Taylor Dahl. This is Making Monsters. I'll catch you guys next time.